name is Michelle Turbide, and I am here in the month of April to offer you a snippet into the seasons of my work. And the theme this month is the theme of renewal. So what I'd like to be offering you is really just tips and tricks that I have been working with over the years to formulate a practice of contentment in my practice of art. And for me, when I think about contentment, it's about being able to accept, to allow, to adjust, and embrace the work that I'm able to do in the seasons of life. And so in this spring season of renewal, it's really about recommitting to the practice of what works for me. And journaling is a practice that works for me. I know that there's a lot of folks out there that have journaled over the years, and this is a thread through my practice that while I create larger works on canvas and more complex works, journaling is always my touchstone to come back to. So I'm renewing my commitment to journaling and creating every day in this container, this sacred container that allows me to express and feel and emote and explore and play with a lot of different kinds of modalities and techniques and different mediums. So when I think about contentment, I really think about how to weave art into my daily life. Create every day is one of my mottos. The more I can create every day, even very small snippets of time, whether it be 5 minutes or 5 hours, it's about that commitment to the practice, that renewing myself every day to be committed to my own art practice, because it is such a fabric of who I am. It is how I touch base with myself. It's how I meditate. It's how I check in with myself. And it's a way to know myself over and over again. So, accepting and rolling with it and adjusting and embracing are the thoughts that I have to offer you for contentment. That is in contrast to some of the things that get in our way in the creative practice, which is comparison and doubt, time limits, space limits, judgments, not feeling good enough, not calling yourself a real artist. All those things are barriers to us having contentment in our practice of creating and living life in a content way. So we have these two dichotomies of one side of us that wants contentment and accepting and allowing, and this other side of us that's always focusing on comparison and doubt and space, time, limitations, and judgment. And contentment is a daily practice. It's cultivating these versus the comparison. I think that in society we get a lot of messages of, we need to slow down and do all these things that allow us to lean into ourselves, and the perfection of that can really be a problem for a lot of us, because contentment is not just about being perfect. It's not about comparing yourself to anyone else who has an hour each morning to devote to their practice, because that is not how it looks for most of us. I, like you, hold a full-time job. I create art in addition to that. So basically I have 2 full-time jobs. I have a family with a child, and actually this year we're homeschooling, so my plate's pretty full. But practice of art can be woven into our lives in the everyday. So what I'm going to be offering you is that contentment can be in very small snippets of time, working in layers, 5 minutes here, 20 minutes there, an hour there, where you then can get to the place of having artwork that you really enjoy and love and find contentment with. But mostly the process is where we find contentment, right? So life is messy. And it's going to convince you that you don't have time. It's going to convince you that you don't have space or that you're not good enough. But we need to do it anyways. We need to commit and renew our commitment to ourselves through the act of creating space for ourselves, whether it be 5 minutes or an hour, whatever you can afford in your day. Okay, so the practice for me involves a lot of layers. And I will try to give you some of my tips and hints along the way and what I like to incorporate. So I always start with gessoing the page, whether it's some heavier page or lighter page. This is about 80-pound weight, and so it's pretty light, and which makes it quite movable. I can throw this in my purse. Oops, it's upside down here. I can throw this in my purse and I can take it with me, and you can see I've started some layers that I haven't finished yet, and I go back into them a little bit at a time. This is watercolor actually, and they're not done, you know? And a lot of abstract artists will tell you, I've also started using gloves most of the time, mostly because it's easier to clean up. It's a lot easier to clean up my hands at the end. And I sometimes worry about the toxicity, even though I used to use barrier guard, but I found this to be a little more effective, especially when I know I only have 10 minutes. So the weight of the paper is only about 80 pounds, and we want to give it a nice base. And this also kind of sets the tone. So while I'm doing this might be the only layer I do in one day, just gessoing pages, especially those days where I'm feeling kind of uninspired and I'm feeling like I don't have a lot in me, a lot of energy. I don't know about you all there, but you know, artwork takes energy. It really does. And it re-energizes us, it renews our energy, but it also can feel like a lot. So sometimes just finding a way to hack yourself into convincing yourself to go. It's sort of like not wanting to go to the gym, but we sort of convince ourselves to go exercise by, well, we'll just put on our shoes and walk around the house and see how that feels, and then maybe we'll go out for a walk, and then, well, maybe I can go a little further than I thought I could. And that sort of hacking our way through allows us to really practice stepping into something that feels uncomfortable. So just a thin layer. This is Utrecht gesso, but obviously you can use whatever is local to you. This is not expensive stuff. Go with the cheap, especially if this is your day-to-day practice. I don't tend to use my best paints for these. Sometimes, it depends, you know, certain colors. And so then, once that's dry, or not, depending on how much time I have, I start with a layer of color. So I work with the theme of landscape and sort of as personal landscape to the soul. So I like to create an upper ground and a lower ground. And that gives me, it kind of grounds me in time and space. So as you can see by some of these earlier pages, you have your skyline and your land. So I tend to use colors to sort of separate those spaces for me. And that kind of begins the process of allowing me to step into the ground. So I think what I'm going to do for this is stay fairly neutral for the first layer. This is Blick's matte acrylic. These are pretty inexpensive if you have the ability to get stuff from Blick. And I'm going to add a little bit of unbleached titanium. This is a favorite color. And I don't do a lot on I don't mix a lot outside of my work when it comes to art journaling. I really just throw it on because it's easier, you know, and it's the more I have to clean up, the less likely I'm going to be to engage in the work in those snippets of time. So the more you can just allow yourself to just come in, do one or two things, and it's easy to clean up. And it's easy to leave. This is a brayer, mostly made for printmaking. I know a lot of artists use these, but I find it's a good, easy way to add some paint. I also like the way things mix and intermingle. So I'm kind of feeling bluey for the bottom. This might be a little too bright, so I might have to add in some other colors. This is Chroma A2 Cobalt Turquoise Light. And I'm going to put a little Payne's Gray in. Value is another piece that is important, I think, and a lot of folks don't pay enough attention to it because value is really going to add a lot of depth to your pieces. And And so I tend to, my first few layers are usually opaque colors. And I vacillate between light and dark layers. So I might put a dark layer on top of this and a light layer on top of this later. We'll see how the process unfolds. Because that allows me to scratch back into it and to create that depth that I really crave. And, you know, make some marks in there. Don't be afraid to sort of even really, this is a tool that's actually used for sculpting, but I love the different widths of it, and I have quite a few of them actually. This one gives me a broader mark. This one's a really fine one. And then what I do is I sort of then go in and sort of smush it around, because I want them to be a little bit unexpected. If they're too uniform, it feels kind of contrived to me, so I like to make sure that it has the surprise quality of not knowing what it's going to turn out like. And then that gives me a lot more to work with. And I find when I look at the landscape, there's a lot of chaos within it. And that's what really attracts me to it, is that it sort of copies life in general, because there's chaos in life and things don't always make sense, but yet there is also somewhat of an order. It's the paradox of the two that I find pretty interesting. So, oops. This is a Catalyst, Princeton. This is one of my favorite tools. I love the edge here, and it's very, very flexible. And so it really allows me to just smush paint around without it being too consistent. And it smooths it out a little bit more. So I really like that. So that might be a layer, and that might be what I do. That might be all I do. I also work in multiples, so if I find that 10 minutes or 5 minutes I have more time, I would pull out another book and I'd start another layer, or I might pull out another book and do a little drawing in there. But this gives me the opportunity to come in, start something, and find a little contentment, a little bit of grounding within myself to be in the art and be in this container of being with myself and slowing down within the midst of the chaotic life that we have. So I'm going to leave that there for now and let it dry, and we'll move back into it in a bit. So this piece is still drying. I let it set for a bit and I hit it with a hairdryer, but it's still quite tacky. And this paper is really thin, so just a word to the wise, this is definitely one that's better for those short 5 or 10 minute bits and letting it dry in between. If you're looking to spend more like 20 minutes to an hour in your creative practice, in your art journal, I would suggest something with a little thicker paper. This is the Strathmore Mixed Media, and these pages are like pretty thick, so they can take a little more abuse. And see, I work upside down a lot apparently. You know, you can even, I did these transfers in here. You can add oil pastels, scratch into it. So these definitely can give you, you can work in those a little bit longer at a time. If you are someone who, you know, you're only gonna have 5 or 10 minutes, or you can have a little bit of both. So you could throw a layer down in here and prep a page to take with you, you know, to draw in when you're, you know, sitting in between something. Or you can, you know, you can put that aside and then use something like this in between. Or you can have multiples of these going at the same time. So I really like to just have lots of options, because when I only have 5 or 10 minutes, I just need to get in there and just start working. Because the other trick I have is that I save up a lot of inspiration to take with me into this. So I might take pictures of things on my walk or in the woods, or I might have moments that I've written about in my journal, my writing journal, that I really want to explore in the landscape, different emotions, different things that are going on in my life that I'm wanting to process. I bring it to the page. So I tend to store that up like a camel, so that when I get here, it's like, whew, I can like let it out and really kind of have it happen here rather than just rattling around in my life. So, oh, and I want to get back to one thing I was saying earlier before I distracted myself, was that a lot of abstract artists talk about how the work sometimes never feels finished, because when you do a lot of abstract work, you really can layer and layer and layer. I mean, you could work on a piece for a year and it still wouldn't ever feel complete to you. And I think that's just another indication that art is a mirror for our process. You know, some of these I've been working on, like this one, this probably has 5 or 6 layers of stuff on it. And so when it's done is sort of when I feel that sense of contentment with it. With my canvases, I feel contentment and then I varnish it. And then that sort of is usually the time when it's finished. With art journals, I sometimes even go back into these later on because I've changed in the process. So, you know, art is a mirror for where you are in that season of your life, but your season changes day to day and changes life, you know, hour to hour and year to year. So 6 months from now, I could go into this and be like, this yellow, I just can't. And I might cover that up. So roll with it, you know, that's part of contentment. It's the play. So now I've gotten paint on myself before I put these on. So anyways, I'm going to throw some more paint down and do a second layer. This might be something I would do usually when it's a little bit drier, but for the nature of time. Thinking about contrast, this blue is a really beautiful color. I just love Payne's Gray. It's one of my favorites. But I thought I would go in with this deep orange on top and then scratch back, because again, when I layer, I want to make sure that there's a push and pull between the layers, because that gives it that depth that I really am going for. And each layer might only have 1 or 2 types of medium. Like in some cases, I might just go in with a drawing tool and draw. And a second layer might be more paint. I tend to do more paint in the beginning because it gives the piece a little bit more structure. When it dries, it's thicker and it's easier to draw on after that. So I'm just gonna go in with this. Hopefully it won't mix too much into the blue because it is still a little bit wet. And then you just add those colors. Now, this is kind of making me feel uncomfortable because it's a little bit muddy and ugly, but all art reaches that ugly phase. It really does. And I might actually go in with the brayer and get it covered up more. The ugly phase is, don't be afraid of it. It is part of the process, and it is what is going to give you a lot of richness later on. So see, the more I cover it up, my guts tell me that feels a little bit better. But I love the blue poking through. And if you notice, orange and blue are real contrasting colors with one another, so they spark this like intensity. And now I feel like this is kind of getting some excitement going on here. And I'm gonna rub off some of this. And then I might even add to that a little bit and give some blue to the sky. So I'm working again with that contrast and layers to give it the excitement and the spontaneity. I think that's the other thing about working layers is it's more spontaneous. You know, when I sit down and I'm doing longer periods of time, I get too careful with it and it becomes too precious. And when you fall in love with it and it becomes too precious, especially when you do more abstract work, you're less likely to take risk. And risk is important when it comes to work because it allows you to be on the edge of what is safe and known, and I've lost a piece, what is safe and what is known to you. And then you never find new ways of sort of showing up in the work. And life is about taking a little bit of risk here and there. It's about showing yourself that you can try new things and you'll be okay. Like, the work won't suffer. In fact, if it goes too far, you can bring it back, you can cover it up. Like, there's no harm. I always just remind myself, it's not precious, this is just a journal, but it gives me that practice of taking risks so that when I'm creating larger works on paintings on canvas, I've had so much practice taking these risks that I'm willing to do it more with more expensive paint and more expensive substrates so that it doesn't get too safe, you know? I love that. Okay, so see those marks? They feel a little bit more incorporated and not so uniform. Oh, I just love that. And then I might just, oops, that one's too thick. Let's try this one. Yeah, there we go. I'm just going for marks. I want to create texture and layers. That's the beautiful part about layers, is that it gives you that ability to, see, now it's getting muddy. You can tell the difference when it starts to blend. So it's too wet, but it's okay. It's okay that it's like that, because we're gonna let it dry afterwards and let it give it some more time to soak it in. And you can see that the pages are buckling a little bit. All right, I think I'm gonna leave that there. It's starting to feel like a desertous, arid climate. So there, that was another 5 minutes of time, and that might be something else I do at the end of the day before bed, where I just come in to my studio and spend 5 or 10 minutes. Or actually, a lot of times I set up something in my dining room. I have a drop cloth that I throw over the table, and I bring down this, and I might just bring down 1 or 2 paints or 1 or 2 things just that I'm going to work on for that layer. And so that gives me that 5 or 10 minutes time to just renew my creative practice, step into it, allow it to be what it is, and then practice embracing what shows up. Okay, I gave it some time, and it's much drier, and you can see the pages sort of unbuckled a little bit. The ends are sticking out, but it's pretty thick now. The paint kind of feels, it's giving it more structure, so I know that I can start layering a little more on it without it getting too damaged. Remember, a little too much water with this thin paper is definitely gonna not do it well. And if you noticed, I didn't really use any water with the paint before. It was straight paint, because if you add too much water in the beginning, in particular, it's gonna damage your binding, and you won't be able to use this thin paper. You'd have to definitely use either a piece of paper all on its own or a canvas or something like that if you want to use a ton of water. Watercolor paper obviously would be the best if you're going to use paper. So kind of just taking a moment to feel where I'm at with this. I've done 2 layers, and this feels kind of muddy and yucky. I think what I'm going to do is go in with a lighter yellowy orange. This is one of my favorite colors. This is Yellow Orange Light by the Matte Acrylics. I kind of love these matte acrylics because it kind of gives it this velvety texture. So I'm going to go in. Well, I apologize because my camera just stopped, but I did add a little bit of this yellow orange before I got sidetracked with realizing that it had stopped, and now this is dry, so it'll be a little bit harder to scratch back into it, but I can do some of that down here on the bottom. But I think that it's gonna be fine. And I might... So some folks get a little nervous with covering up too much. Again, I've had a lot of practice with taking risks, so I really encourage you to allow yourself to be able to just let go. Let go of what's here. Allow whatever's going to happen. Let yourself be in the moment. Because the more we try to control the process, I don't know, I find the least contentment I have when I can let go and really just be in a place of play and enjoyment. I find a lot more contentment. So you'll notice I work pretty fast too. I kind of attack it. Some folks are probably not going to be as interested in that, and they are a slower pace, and that's fine. I think everybody has their own pace. And everybody has their own form of contentment. This is just a peek into my process and sort of what it brings for me. And then, you know, the great thing about taking classes is you sort of borrow from people as you're learning. Or borrow from people if you're an advanced artist and you're just taking classes to kind of spark something new or see something that might be inspiring to you. But I really encourage you to just play with lots of different ways. These are art journals. You don't have to show them to anybody. They don't have to be precious. Just kind of lean into being with what shows up and not having it be the end result. So I'm gonna keep doing a little work. I'm probably gonna speed this up for the time period, but I'm just gonna keep layering colors, and they're gonna dry in between a little bit, and you'll notice these are very subtle marks here because the underlayer is a lighter color than say here. But I, again, go dark to light to dark to light. I'm gonna stick with paint for this layer, and then probably a different layer I'm gonna go in with some inks. So. So I've put a few different colors of layers in, and I'm really starting to like be a part of this landscape. I'm feeling really attuned with it, the spontaneity of it. I'm liking the marks so far. So once I sort of get a place where I'm really enjoying what's happening, I'm finding some contentment, then I start to ask myself questions like, what is this needing? What am I feeling called to intuitively respond to this piece? And after I do a lot of opaque colors, I tend to bring in some whites and then go in with some inks. So this would be your transparent layers. So usually I start with opaque and then I go to transparent. And the beautiful thing about this is you can really start to get some varied colors. This is muted gray. I'm really into the Liquitex muted color line right now. I just find it to be really, this one's sort of like a purpley, like luscious thing. And sort of what I was thinking, actually what I was sort of feeling inspired to do, is to then go in, this is isopropyl alcohol or rubbing alcohol. just from your local drugstore. This is 70%. You can get up to 90%. And if it's got enough water in there, this is a little bit of water. It's runny enough, and I've had enough layers here where it's not going to kill the paper. And then you can sort of go in and create some texture. And then what I do is I let it dry a few moments, and then I might go in with the rubbing alcohol and create a little bit more texture, but I'm sort of digging that. I love this juxtaposition of these colors here. And what the rubbing alcohol does is it sort of creates a resist, and then it dries like that. But it dries, so you can still go over it. So I'm gonna hit it with the hairdryer, try to speed up the process and kind of mess around with transparent layers a little bit and see where that takes me. I did a lot of transparency and I kind of worked around with it a little bit, and I actually am getting to that place where like this isn't working as much for me. I think I liked it better before, and so sometimes you don't know what you like until you sort of push beyond it, and then you can pull it back. This really feels here to me, I call them the storytellers, like what's the storyteller of what's coming up for me, and this path I think feels more important to me, even though right now it's receding a bit because this turquoise has kind of taken over, and it's just like it doesn't feel right. So I'm gonna go over this in white and sort of scratch in a little bit to reveal some of the turquoise, because I think the turquoise would be a nice contrast to some of the foreground, but I'm really feeling like that's what's gonna happen next. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. little wet, so you can kind of go into it with a whole bunch of marks. These marks represent to me I live in Vermont, and we have a lot of farmland, and I'm a 4th generation Vermonter, so the land is really important to me, and it's sort of like a metaphor for, you know, our sacred legacy and where we live and breathe and create life. And I love wild grasses and the way that they can sort of come up through whatever other colors are there, so it adds this real texture. So this is really starting to feel like home to me. And I think that's what we're all looking for. We're finding a place within ourselves to really kind of lean into. And it's messy. It's, you know, it's not clean. And the process goes back and forth between loving and hating what we're doing. But that's the process. And the process is where I find my contentment, because it's about showing up layer by layer, listening to my urges, listening to what I want, and paying attention to that intuition that's leading me somewhere. There's always a place where I call it the mud phase, that it's gone too far and it doesn't feel right, you don't like it, but you can always pull it back. And I think that those layers, just even the muddy layers or the layers that you don't like, they add to the piece. It's sort of like all our imperfections make us really unique and beautiful. And that process really helps me feel content. So I think that I'm pretty ready to call this done. I do sometimes go in with a few drawing utensils. This is some peel-off Charna markers. This will go on top of acrylic pretty well. You can also use water-soluble graphite, which I use quite often. They give it a little texture as well. But I'm finding a lot of peace in this place, and this feels like the landscape of me today. And the drawing piece just sort of helps me connect with the totality of what has transpired here, and allows me time to check in and figure out if it's complete. Some of this is still a little bit wet, so I can make marks that way too. And I'm really enjoying what has transpired here. There's lots of layers. I love the little peek-throughs that show you all the different layers we've done. It's giving me a feeling of peace and calm. That's kind of what I was going for, and it's feeling pretty expansive. I think the white, coming back in with the white, really opened it all up for me. It was starting to feel really closed in, and I could tell in my gut that that wasn't right. So I think that I'm going to leave it here. I really want to thank you for being a part of this process, and being here for a peek into what the work I do, and how I approach contentment in my practice and my art practice in general, of, you know, keeping that daily practice, touching base with myself through the art, touching base with having some sacred time for myself, whether it just be 5 minutes or an hour, whatever your life allows you to do. I just encourage you to keep renewing that commitment to yourself over and over and over again, and guaranteed you will lose it. I do it all the time. Sometimes, even though I have a pretty daily practice, there's weeks where I just can't get to it, and I have to kind of renew myself again, and renew my commitment to making sure that I have 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes just to check in with myself. So just to review, we talked a little bit about moments of time in your practice, working in layers so that you can have short bits and long bits, whatever daily time allows for you. Working in multiple pieces, that you can have multiple pieces going in order to sort of keep it fresh and you know, attend to whatever feels right to you in the moment. Really embracing, adjusting, allowing, and rolling with it so that you can play and explore, which is a really, I think, in my personal opinion, an important part of the contentment of art making, and also art journaling, and storing up inspiration throughout your day-to-day life and over time that you can bring into the piece and kind of put on the page, whether you explore portraits like Jane, or you like landscapes like me, or if you're into multimedia collage, whatever your thing is, store up your inspiration over time. You can keep a Pinterest board, you can keep pictures on your phone, you can write down things in your journal, or all of the above. And have several spaces where you can create. I happen to have a dedicated room, a studio, but for many years I practiced in my bedroom. I had a dedicated space in my bedroom. I've done it on the kitchen table. I've had mobile art kits that I brought to different parts of the room. Just really commit to yourself and, keep it as simple as you need to in order to keep the practice going. So I wish you the best on this journey this year. Jane has put together a wonderful offering, and I'm excited for you to continue to explore contentment and the art practice, what that means for you, and take what works for you and incorporate that into your practice, and allow yourself to hone in on what helps you feel content and alive while you're creating. And I wish you the best. Have a wonderful trip the rest of this year. Thank you for joining me. So I just want to show you that there's a few different ways you can use different substrates to be able to incorporate art into your life in sort of layers and working on things slowly over time. These right here are studies that I did on paper, and this was just I think it's even 80-pound paper. It's nothing substantial. Mixed media paper, I think it is. And I use gesso first to sort of give it a coat and make it thicker. And then I do layer by layer. So I often go in one layer at a time, adding marks, taking away, retracting, and also adding drawing or other types of mediums. So these are just, what you might buy for your kids, really, if you have kids, or just 80-pound paper is pretty thin. It's not something you're gonna be able to put intense layers on because it's just not thick enough. But for the purposes of incorporating some day-to-day creating into your life, this is perfectly fine. And this is another journal that I've been working with for quite a while. This is Sea White of Brighton, and it's pretty inexpensive. It's not my favorite, but I've actually been gravitating towards it lately because it's just easy to carry around, it's thin, it's easy to use. And so this has been a staple for me of late. It's about the same weight of this paper, it's just in a book form. I can lay down a layer of gesso, and then I can scratch into the layers. I can make marks with charcoal. This is charcoal. So there's lots of different ways you can create in layers, little bits at a time, incorporating it into your day-to-day life so that you can, over time, work through pieces that feel more substantial to you. Every little bit counts, right? So see, this definitely falls apart if you put too much water on it. So let that be a lesson for you. But it works for me, and it's something that I can carry around in my purse. These are pencil marks. I have ink in here. They're, the more portable and accessible to you, the more you're going to incorporate it into those moments of time here and there when you have the ability to create. So that just gives you, this one I think actually, yeah, this one's finished. So that's just a small dose of some ways that you can incorporate very inexpensive layers over time to then build up to something that you feel quite content with.